In today's video, we're going to be checking out the new Hazardous Propulsion exotic chest piece and how with certain abilities you're able to fire up to 27 rockets straight without reloading. This build is finally what Titans were looking for, an excellent range build that's great for clearing ads and even better for killing bosses. Remember to leave a like if you found this video helpful, and if you like seeing other helpful builds for both PvE and the Crucible, consider hitting that sub button. With that being said, let's check out the rest of the build. For our abilities, to start things off, we're going to be using Thrusters as our class ability. This is a must run in my opinion, as it allows Exodus rockets we get from our chest piece to be fired on command without having to wait for a barrier to be used. Next, we're going to be using Frenzied Blade as our melee of choice. This melee allows us to get 3 total charges, which comes into play with our aspect choices later. Frenzied Blade also severs targets on hit, which is a nice bonus, because it gives us the flexibility for what melee we want to use at certain times. Lastly, we're going to be using Suppressor Grenades. This is also a must run in my opinion, with that being a rocket damage build. We'll get more into detail on that when we get into our fragments. As for our super, this is rather flexible, but since this is a ranged combat build, we're going to be using Twilight Arsenal. As for our aspects, our first one we're going to be using is Knockout. Knockout is actually the third type of melee we get in this build, again building into that great flexibility for health regen and the ability to use it on certain shields. Our next aspect is going to be Consecration, tying back into our melee choice of Frenzied Blade. This allows us to have 3 Consecration charges total at once, which is one of the most powerful melees in the game for both ad clear and boss damage. Heading into our fragments, this is the area that really puts the cherry on top of this build and makes it what it is. First, we're going to be using Facet of Courage, which allows us to combo our melee abilities really well. By hitting a target with our Frenzy Blade, that will place Sever on them, which we could then follow that up with a Consecration for bonus damage against people with darkness damage afflicted to them. Second, we're going to be running Facet of Purpose, which gives us a Void Overshield every time we pick up an orb. Keep in mind that if you change your super off Twilight Arsenal, the type of buff that you'll get here will be different and depending on the super that you choose. Next, we're going to be running Facet of Protection for that nice strength bump, along with damage resistance while we're surrounded. These last 2 fragments honestly make the build and are very much must-runs in my opinion. We have Facet of Dominance, which gives our suppressor grenades weaken. By using certain artifact mods, we're able to get huge damage bonus off our main component of the build, being Two-Tailed Fox. Lastly, we have Facet of Command, which reloads our guns on suppressing targets. This honestly makes the build. The exotic Two-Tailed Fox fires 3 rockets, and the first of which being a suppressing rocket, which allows us to never reload it, making this one of the strongest range boss killer builds on Titan. When you have reserve mods on, this rocket has a total of 9 in the back pocket, and since each rocket firing essentially is 3, with that being the Void Rocket, followed by the Solar Rocket, followed by the Arc Rocket if you have the Catalyst, that means we could fire 27 rockets straight without reloading on a boss damage phase. In terms of the gameplay loop here, there actually is a step-by-step process to get the most out of the build. First, you'll want to stack up your Exodus rockets by getting precision hits or kills on smaller red bar enemies. Next, you'll want to throw your suppressor grenade at a boss to weaken it, while at the same time using your thrusters to send out your Exodus rockets and getting your damage bonus. After that, spam as much Two-Tailed Fox as you can at a boss until you run out of ammo. For more flexibility, you can even swap to a rocket sidearm here, like the Call or Indebted Kindness, which also gets granted that weapon damage bonus that the chest piece gives because it is a rocket sidearm due to the archetype of the gun. Something to note here, you'll only get the instant reload on proc from Two-Tailed Fox if the first rocket does not kill on hit. This is super important with the build, meaning that you'll really only want to use Two-Tailed Fox on this build on really powerful enemies such as yellow bars and bosses. If you try and use your Two-Tailed Fox here on a group of smaller ads, you actually won't get that reload to proc because all of your rockets are going to kill and you won't get that reload fragment to proc. When it comes to stats on this build, you'll first want to prioritize 100 Resilience, as this stat will grant us our thrusters back faster, allowing us to spam more Exodus rockets on ads and bosses. Next, you'll want to max out your Discipline as much as possible. Getting your suppressor grenade ready for any mini boss or boss that might happen to show up whenever you're playing will allow your rockets to do much more damage. Lastly, you'll want to focus on Strength, which will recharge our Frenzied Blade and Consecration more, allowing us to take on groups of ads when they spawn and allowing us to generate more orbs. For our armor mods on this build, starting with our helmet, I went with Solar Siphon. This is actually super flexible, as you have complete freedom on this build to run whatever primary you want. Next, you can even replace this with a Rocket Sidearm Siphon mod, should you want to use that more. So in this instance, you would want to replace it with Strand Siphon or Arc Siphon, depending on if you want to use Indebted Kindness or the Call. Next, we have Heavy Ammo Finder and Scout. Since this is a rocket-focused build, we want as much ammo as possible. Moving on to our arms, we have Focusing Strike, which grants us our thrusters back on those Consecration and Frenzied Blade hits and kills. We also run Heavy-Handed, as the majority of our ad clear will be done using our melees, and those will help us by spawning orbs and granting us our damage bonus surges. Next, we're running Impact Induction to make sure that we get our suppressor nades back on those melees as well. Moving on to the chest, we're running Void Reserves here for our Two-Tailed Fox, along with Charged Up to carry more armor charges, and a Harmonic Resistance for that last spot as well. For our legs, we're running Insulation, which helps get our thrusters back as fast as possible to fire more Exodus rockets. For the last 2 mods, we're running 2x Surges here for the Solar Rocket from Two-Tailed Fox, and my primary choice being the Raid Pulse Nullify. You could have pretty much total freedom here to what surges you want to run depending on what weapons you're running. So for example, if you want to focus more on the Arc Rocket from Two-Tailed Fox and run Arc Surges while you run an Arc Primary or run Indebted Kindness, you have freedom of that as well. I'm also running Powerful Attraction on my mark here, which acts as a free utility kickstart, so when I use all of my thrusters, all orbs around me feed back into my thrusters due to me using Insulation on my legs. I'm also going to be running Time Dilation here to make sure that my damage bonuses and surges last as long as possible. And lastly, I'm going to be using a Bomber mod to make sure that I get my grenade back faster as well. As for the artifact mods that tie into this build really well, we're going to be having Void Hegemony, which gives us a Void Small Overshield when we defeat a weakened target, which we get by using our Suppressor Grenade. Next, we have Radiant Orbs, which allows us to become Radiant by picking up an orb, granting us bonus damage as well. At the time of this recording, this does not actually stack with the Propulsion chest piece, but Bungie did state that they're going to be fixing that in the future. Next, we have Galvanic Armor, which gives us damage resistance while amplified. You can get damage resistance by getting amplified on this build by using your uncharged knockout melee, or even if you wanted to use an arc weapon as your primary, such as Indebted Kindness or Aikilos SMG. Next, we have Expanding Abyss, which grants us our Two-Tailed Fox a weapon damage bonus because we are going to be using suppressor grenades before firing those rockets, as the boss will now be weakened. Last, we have Shield Crush, which gives us a great ability regen when we have our Void Overshield amplified or Radiant by picking up those orbs. As for our weapons, 2 of our slots are already set in stone pretty much. We're going to be using Two-Tailed Fox and a Rocket Sidearm. You have full freedom on whether or not you want to use the Call or Indebted Kindness as your Rocket Sidearm. However, by using the Call and a light energy weapon, I'm able to charge my Prismatic really easily because the Call is a strand weapon which ties into the darkness side of the tree. Because this build doesn't have much darkness damage within it with our aspects and our ability choices. As for your primary, you have full freedom here. Just make sure that you're getting precision hits on those kills to charge those Exodus rockets, which is why I went for a Pulse here. So there you guys have it. Us Titans finally have an excellent range boss fighting build, and it only took a decade to get it. If you enjoyed, please make sure you leave a like on the video, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.